Egypt says it's in a state of war following simultaneous assaults by fighters linked to ISIL. The cabinet has approved new anti-terrorism laws, while the Muslim Brotherhood is calling on supporters to rise in revolt. On this Inside Story, Egypt on the offensive and the defensive. Hello and welcome to the programme in Doha. I'm Adrian Finighan. Egypt is introducing sweeping new anti-terrorism laws following unprecedented attacks in its lawless Sinai region and growing opposition to a government crackdown on dissent. Government leaders say the new law will provide quick and just deterrence against what it called terrorism. Egypt's chief prosecutor was killed by a car bomb explosion on Monday, while the Sinai assaults mark a significant escalation in fighting in the Desert Peninsula. Complex and coordinated attacks were carried out by a group called Sinai Province, which has pledged allegiance to ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Fighters say they simultaneously attacked 15 military checkpoints in El Arish, Sheikh Zayed and Rafah. The number of casualties is being disputed, but medical and security sources are saying that up to 100 fighters and 64 soldiers were killed. Egypt's Prime Minister says that it's officially in a state of war. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood, which Egypt considers a terrorist organisation, is calling on supporters to rise in revolt after accusing police of killing 13 of its members. Al Jazeera's Omar Ashour picks up the story.
As the dead were taken from this morgue in Cairo, the families say their loved ones were killed in cold blood. They say they had been taken into custody earlier in the day.
They fingerprinted them when they were alive. They were arrested alive and got killed later. They were hit in the head, chest and side with multiple bullets.
The Egyptian government says the Muslim Brotherhood leaders were killed during the raid because they were fugitives plotting terror attacks. The Muslim Brotherhood denies the government account and says the leaders were members of a family support group.
I blame the killing on Sisi and everyone who authorized and supported him. I hope they taste the same by losing their loved ones.
Since the military coup which toppled President Mohammed Morsi 2 years ago, the Muslim Brotherhood became the state's main enemy and designated a terrorist organization. Thousands of its leaders, members and supporters have been killed, arrested, jailed and sentenced to death. This includes Mohammed Morsi. Other government opponents have been also arrested or gone missing, but the government's intolerance is getting even harder. After the killing of Egypt's top public prosecutor in a car bomb attack on Monday, the Egyptian cabinet approved new laws to face what President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi calls terrorism. One of Egypt's biggest security threats is in the Sinai, a place the Prime Minister has said is in a state of war. Groups such as Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, which later became known as Province of Sinai and has sworn allegiance to ISIL. It carried out a devastating attack on security forces there on Wednesday. More than 100 people were reportedly killed. The Egyptian military has an ongoing security operation in Sinai. It has demolished hundreds of homes on the border with Gaza and Israel to create a buffer zone and to end weapons smuggling. This has added to claims from many residents that they are marginalized and treated as second-class citizens. But it appears the government's iron fist policy is only getting tighter in Sinai and across the country. Omar Ashour for Inside Story.
All right, let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. Joining us from London is Omar Ashour, a senior lecturer of security studies at the University of Exeter, who's authored a book on security sector reform in Egypt. From Cairo, we have Marwa Maziad, a fellow at the Middle East Center at the University of Washington, who focuses on civil-military relations. And from Tel Aviv, we're joined by Daniel Nisman, CEO of the Levantine Group, which is a geopolitical risk and research consultancy. Welcome to you all. Daniel, let's start with you if we can. Why has Sinai become such a restive province?
First of all, thanks for having me. The situation in the Sinai has been ongoing really since the January 25th revolution. in 2011, where there was a massive security vacuum, which basically complemented years of neglect by the Mubarak regime, which in turn fostered a multi-million-dollar smuggling economy that was fostered by Bedouin tribes living in the Sinai, smuggling weapons to the Gaza Strip, and other materials, drugs, and human trafficking to Israel. And with all of this criminal activity also fostered the radical Islam that we've seen come up in the instability happening across the region. What's happened in the past couple of years is that these jihadists have risen their heads and committed these mega attacks against the Egyptian military, whether it be the time when the SCAF was in power, Morsi, and now, of course, Sisi. And after each of these mega attacks, which has been happening every 3 or 6 months, culminating in the ones we saw yesterday, the military has tried to increase its tactics and commit these major operations that, for the time being, don't seem to be effective in quelling the problem.
Yeah, I just wonder why it is so difficult to maintain control in Sinai. What challenges does the Egyptian army face, Daniel?
It faces a few challenges. First of all, we're talking about a large territory. We're talking about an area that requires a significant manpower in terms of troops. And it's not that the Egyptian military has any problem with manpower, but it does have a lot of other areas to secure. It has the Suez Canal, it has the mainland, it has the Libyan border. The Sinai requires not just a significant troop presence, but it also requires intelligence capabilities that the Egyptian military lost after the fall of Mubarak. That connection with the 500,000 Bedouin residents living there has been lost. And now we're talking about a significant, which you could even call a black hole in terms of human intelligence. The military is not able to get inside these communities that are hosting the jihadists. The military doesn't have the necessary training or technology to observe or to monitor communications. And then there's the matter of training for soldiers, discipline, and deployments. And what you can see is that you have troops stationed around various population centers, but they're basically blind. They're basically, what happened yesterday was we saw a quite significant multi-pronged attack involving anywhere between 70 to 100 militants attack 15 different points from all directions, and these guys knew exactly when the shifts, the guard shifts at these different bases would be switching. They knew that these soldiers would be tired after the break fast. Yeah. And they knew they snuck up on them.
Daniel, I want to bring in Marwa if I can. I saw Marwa shaking her head at one point there while she was listening to you. You want to pick up on what Daniel was saying, Marwa, and tell me, do you think that the heavy-handed tactics used against the Bedouin that Daniel was telling us about there in Sinai by the government, are they counterproductive?
I agree partially with what Daniel said. He gave some background to a situation. But that is not really the complexity of what is going on. In fact, it's not a black hole, and it's not that the army has lost touch with the Bedouins there. It's a very complex relationship that is shaping up over the past 2 years since the June 30th uprising and the ousting of Morsi. The complexity of it is that actually at some point they succeed in creating these relations with the Bedouin community, the Egyptians in Sinai. I'm not going to call them the Bedouin communities. That's something from Israel, perhaps. But the Egyptians in Israel, in Sinai, that it goes back and forth. Those individual terrorist, militant elements who are Egyptians have multiple affiliations. They belong to their tribes, but they also are attracted to the ISIS international network that they latch themselves to. So a tribe community within Sinai, within Egypt, has this conflicted relationship vis-a-vis its youth and vis-a-vis the armed forces, the police security forces in Sinai, the Egyptian police forces and such. So that's why actually you don't have these breaches of security and this terrorist events every day. It's because you can control for some of them, but then every 6 months or 8 months or a year, you'll have some events. Okay. Now, let me just say this. Sinai is under control. The purpose was actually yesterday to physically occupy Arish and Sheikh Zuwaid, Iraq and Syria cities. So that did not happen. And the terrorist groups failed in this major task. Now, are they not able to hold more ground? Are they not going to come back in this dynamic? No, they are trying hard to do that, and that's like ISIS style in the number of other cities that they took responsibility for attacking. But the idea is that the people are not terrified here in Egypt, and the question for your audience, the international audience, is to weigh this kind of situation where you have armed forces, formal armed forces of a state, a sovereign state, versus the competing order of violence of all these militias around it. And that's the question for Egyptians right now, and they have definitely picked their armed forces, their people's armed forces.
Okay, let's bring in Omar Ashour then in London. What do you make of what you've heard, Omar? And also, this latest attack was a sophisticated one. It indicates perhaps that the fighters have had some training. What does that tell us about the changing nature of the conflict in Sinai and the Egyptian army's ability to deal with it?
I think it is true. This is Egypt's most powerful armed non-state actor since a very long time, probably since the 50s. Nothing compared to what happened in the 90s. This is an organization that has been steadily growing in its resources, in its capacity, in the intensity of its attacks, in the scale and the scope of its attacks, despite a ferocious crackdown that was steadily developing from 2011 and was intensified to an unprecedented level, even compared under the SCAF or Morsi or Mubarak from September 2013 onwards. And despite that, the scale of attacks is expanding. Part of the problem is the narrative that is being portrayed. You know, the statist narrative is the state is somehow, or the armed institutions of the state can do whatever they want, can do the crackdown, and all what you need to do is to rally and cheer for them for whatever they're doing. The counterinsurgency policy that was implemented in Sinai since 1982, after the Israeli withdrawal, but specifically since 2000, when this problem started to become a security issue after the Second Palestinian Intifada, in the last 15 years, this counterinsurgency policy has been ineffective and has been alienating large segments of the North Sinaian societies and tribes, and have been since 2011 festering a serious problem. So rather than having a revision of these policies, rather than having some sort of oversight of what the security sector has been doing there in the last 15 years, the idea now and the narrative being portrayed by the regime and the propaganda tools behind it in the media is the idea that we should clap for what's happening and rally around the army, as opposed to revise these policies and look at what exactly has been going on. You don't have independent media. You have propaganda from one side, from the non-state actor side, from a group that more or less gave its allegiance in November 2014 to IS, and the propaganda from the other side, from the military spokesperson, who claimed the numbers of the deaths
Omar, sorry to interrupt. I want to back what you're saying back to both Marwa and Daniel in just a moment. But before we do that, they say that Egypt is in a state of war. The scale and complexity of yesterday's attack suggests that Sinai province, the group, has begun to coordinate with ISIL's leadership. Now, is there a danger, perhaps, that those fighters will, as their attacks become more sophisticated, be able to hold ground in Sinai, just as they've done in Iraq?
I'll take that one. I think that's something that's a few steps away. And, you know, like I said earlier, the Egyptian military has one of the largest, at least in manpower, militaries in the region. we should look at yesterday's attack as a symbolic victory for Wilayat Sinai, meaning they sought to hold territory in the town. I don't think that they even thought that they could hold it for even longer than a few hours. But it actually is quite extraordinary to see the transformation that the group Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis transformed, after it transformed into Wilayat Sinai in November, to see the improvements both in terms of its ability to attack, its ability to intimidate the local population and in the local population, civilian population, and the local police forces, and also to spread its efforts through propaganda. The Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis organization, which preceded Wilayat Sinai, was a very shadowy organization. Since these two organizations linked up, you can see a very notable improvement in the way that Wilayat Sinai talks about its charity activity, how it issues threats, very, very specific threats to even specific companies, locals helping the government, how it advertises its executions. And then I think the culmination of that was the attack yesterday, which you can see was carried out very similar in terms of sophistication and coordination to attacks that you can see in places like Kobani or in Ramadi.
Just going to let me hand it briefly to Marwa, who's itching to get in here before we move on. Marwa, yes, what do you?
I agree with the framing that it is ISIS now that is trying to attack and have its poles within Egypt. So this is not the framing of a grievance within the communities in Sinai. It's beyond that. It's really ISIS, which is not ISIS anymore, not ISIL anymore, meaning the Levant. It's IS. It's the Islamic State trying to anchor itself in more areas in the Arab world and the region entirely. So I agree with the framing of that, and that actually is a counter argument to what Omar was saying, is that now you're talking about ISIS trying to gain hold on the ground. Has it succeeded as of yesterday? No. So I disagree with Daniel's assessment of the situation. But that's a big signal for us all internationally to frame it properly. Is actually IS trying to take over Egypt? And not Sinai only, but take over Egypt as in Iraq and Syria. And if that is the case, what is expected of the armed forces of the Egyptian state and its people?
Okay.
So actually that framing is significant. It's not the insurgency or the armed struggle of a people within Egypt that we should stand by. It's beyond that. And let me, from my expertise in civil military relations in the Middle East
briefly,
and Iraq and Turkey, just remind you of one thing. Remember how the Iraqi army, the recommendation was all about restructuring the Iraqi army. Let's not forget that those laid off officers with nowhere to go were actually the trainers, the private lesson teachers of some of these IS group, the Islamic State group. So the idea of let's attack an army and restructure it immediately and have competing orders of violence and militias left and right, that is the chaotic situation that is in the entire region now, and to which Egyptians are responding. So
look, I'm going to stop you there because we need to move on here. I want to talk more about Egypt's new terrorism law, which is due to be signed off by President Sisi, legislation that the cabinet says will provide quick and just deterrence. The new law says sets the death penalty or life in prison for anyone who leads, runs or funds a designated terrorist organisation, as we've been saying, something Egypt considers the Muslim Brotherhood to be. And it says security forces won't face any legal repercussions for violence used while putting the law into practice. Prosecutors would be given the right to tap and record private telephone conversations and messages online. The new measures also call for 5-year prison terms for anyone found guilty of promoting violence through social media. Omar Ashour, what are we to make of the Sisi government's new anti-terrorism legislation then? What does it mean for moderate political opposition in Egypt? And perhaps it is needed if as Marwa suggests, IS could be looking to do what it's done in Iraq and Syria in Egypt.
I think the legal framing is not needed because the practices are already there. The heavy-handed crackdowns are already there. The mass death sentences are already there. We saw extrajudicial killing that has been going on for a while. The idea that the factions that are dominating the security and the military establishment believe that they can bomb your way out of any problem. And that has been the trend, unfortunately, in Egypt for a few decades now. But it's just escalating without any reviewing of the policies of the eradicationist policies. And I can understand the graduate student, very enthusiastic about going one way or cheering for one team or the other. But it is really not about restructuring the army. It's about reviewing the policies. And I don't understand what counter-argument. Everybody knows that IS is operating. The Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis gave an allegiance in November 2014 to al-Baghdadi. Most of the propaganda videos that were issued, the three main ones with elaborate, sophisticated media propaganda, were given this allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So it is operating in Northeast Sinai. The question is, was that inevitable? The question is, if we did not have these major crackdowns and a total collapse of a democratization process by the military, and previous to that, a whole history from 2000 till 2011, and then another phase from 2011 till 2015 of a continuity of a crackdown policy, intensified in one way or another and in one area or another. Would we have this outcome at the moment? And if we have this outcome at the moment, should we have some accountability and some reviewing of this policy? Forget about holding officers accountable for extrajudicial killings, for raising houses down, for taking ransom from the locals, for alienating major segments of the North Sinaian society. Forget about all that.
All right.
Should we review the policy at the moment or not?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're rapidly running out of time, and I just want to get. I want to give Marwa and Daniel the opportunity to come in just once more. Marwa, what do you make of what Omar was saying there? Very very briefly, please. It's difficult to see why the legislation in Egypt needed to be tighter, with hundreds of people already jailed and sentenced to death.
Well, that the sentence, the death sentence for Morsi against the crime of treason and all of that, once that was announced, that was news last week or 10 days ago. But the point was that there would be an appeal, that there would be a slow, meticulous, 2 years long process of not getting to the hanging moment, right? But to have the assassination of the Attorney General and have the framing that this is some sort of preemptive terrorism or some sort of preemptive response to Morsi that was not even hanged yet. And this kind of cycle of violence, I agree that it's perpetuated, but I think the Muslim Brotherhood are making a mistake by associating themselves with IS at this point.
All right.
So you have the grief of Attorney General assassinated, and that tied to events in Sinai and that tied to Muslim Brotherhood and IS. These should not be connected.
I don't think they are. Let's bring in Daniel here. What do you make of what Marwa was just saying there? And look, you've got a minute to tell me whether the government's strategies and its operational tactics are working or failing.
I think, first of all, unfortunately, when you're dealing with such a brutal group like IS or some of the radicalized Muslim Brotherhood offshoots that you see operating in Cairo, planting bombs every day that often go unreported, you're going to need some heavy-handed tactics. But that's for the short term. For the long term, we need to get to the conclusion that there is an open wound in Egyptian society that happened from the Morsi period. And until this wound is healed, which most likely needs to be through some kind of political reconciliation, which probably includes some sort of amnesty program for militants like that was used in Algeria, like that was used in Saudi Arabia. Without some sort of political reconciliation that heals this wound, there's always going to be that violent outlet for these anti-government groups to go to. IS is feeding off of the disappointment of the Muslim Brotherhood supporters. And right now, violence is one of the very few outlets that they have to express that. So, to sum it up, yeah, you're going to need significant military operations, and they're going to need to be backed up by legislation. But you got to heal that wound. that Egyptian society has to heal from this tumultuous period.
There we are going to have to leave it. Many thanks indeed to all of you for taking part in the programme today. Omar Ashour in London, Maziad in Cairo, and Daniel Nisman in Tel Aviv. And thank you for watching too. As always, we welcome your thoughts. You can get in touch via our programme page at aljazeera.com, or you could post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.